We need more applause for that than for Greg. Come on, come on.
To quote Jeb Bush, please clap. Thank you.
All right.
All right, well, great. Well, I'm Greg Lindsay, and yes, welcome to our session here. I'll introduce our panelists in just one moment here, but yeah, we're gonna have a great conversation today, really about, creating the taxonomies of wayfinding for identifying, communicating, and building trust in the technologies that surround us, and soon, of course, embodied AI. And if you wanna know what's the worst that could happen if we don't build those things, well, I've got the report for you for Cornell Tech. But enough about me. First, I wanna introduce our panelists. Let's see, coming on out here, Jackie Liu, CEO and founder of Helpful Places, creator of DTPR. Come on out, Jackie. There we go. More applause for everybody here. Nigel Jacob, of course, visiting fellow at MIT's Leventhal Center, but of course, perhaps best known as the co-founder of Boston's Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. Thank you, Nigel, for joining us, making the schlep. And coming from the West Coast here, we have, of course, Leah Eriksen, Director of Technology and Innovation at the City of Long Beach, and their CIO. So, yes, more applause. All right. I will shut up for a moment here because to begin the session here, we're going to actually start by explaining what digital trust for routines and policies, places and routines, DTPR. It's just, it lives in my head as an acronym. But Jackie created
It lives in
DTPR.
your head as an acronym.
It lives in my head as an acronym. And someday we will just think of it as just DTPR. But first we're going to have Jackie walk through the origins of DTPR because like any good hero, she has an origin story and talk a bit about basically how this got started and how it's evolving. So Jackie, the slides, please.
Okay, cool. Can people hear me? Yes, awesome. I'm going to see if this clicker works. So I'm going to start by telling you a story about this really amazing smart city project that I'm really proud of. It was designed to be a groundbreaking urban development, setting a new bar for sustainability and livability. The intention was for the place to use the world's best cutting-edge technology to achieve goals like 100% electric energy efficient buildings, reuse stormwater and gray water, use sensors and AI to manage traffic, to prioritize traffic and improve pedestrian safety. And the list goes on and on and on. And it was intended to be a blueprint for how data and AI could actually help build a better urban future. So many of you in this room probably have heard of it. Have anyone in this room heard of Sidewalk Labs?
Show of hands if you remember Sidewalk Labs.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
So Sidewalk Toronto was a smart city project that actually was being watched around the world, led by Dan Doctoroff, funded by Alphabet. We're an innovation company that was founded to deliver step change improvements in quality of life by bringing together the physical and the digital worlds, honestly, really in like a very holistic way. But the project never happened, and along with it, many people's hopes, including my own, I grew up in Toronto, for the Toronto of tomorrow were actually crushed. And so it never happened because there was a lack of trust. Both locally in Toronto and from around the world, what we heard was people voicing so much concern about this vision of a technology-enabled future. These concerns were often summed up as, I'm worried about my privacy, or, hey, you're bringing the surveillance capitalism model of the internet to the built environment. And so a project that was actually initially heralded with so much optimism and tried to achieve such amazing public outcomes actually got crushed in the face of this public outcry. And the reality is, though, Sidewalk Labs sort of like leaving Toronto and the smart city project not happening doesn't change the fact that the tech is actually all around us already. I can't even tell you how many cameras I counted on my way into this space. And I think what happened was with this project was that people intuitively understood that we were dealing with a new form of infrastructure. They understood that digital and AI were becoming part of our cities in a way that shapes community outcomes, the same way roads do, the same way highways do, the same way parks across the street. But unlike those physical amenities, there was no way for them to really understand what was being proposed or what that would actually mean. There was no way for them to see what was being planned and have a dialogue around their use. And so at Sidewalk, we didn't have the tools to answer their questions. And what happened was, in that gap, the space got filled with fear and anxiety. And so that's actually when we started to get to work. We started to think about, well, what if we actually take that as a design prompt? How do we work with people to help them understand all these layers of digital infrastructure that are becoming part of our cities? And so we started a co-design project that was the origin of digital trust for places and routines. We brought together dozens of experts across privacy, tech, public realm, and ran this process to answer this question: how might residents and visitors in a smart district begin to understand this? How can we actually give them a pathway for learning more about these systems so that there can be a discussion and dialogue rather than polarization and fear? So we used this as a starting point in designing DTPR. We looked at visual languages as a precedent for ways to convey critical information in a visual way. We also looked at nutrition labels, which helps put sort of like complex concepts into structured ways so that people can really understand and find the information that they're looking for when they want it. And so digital trust for places and routines is actually designed to achieve those exact same objectives, but for tech in public spaces. And so this is a very busy slide on how it works. Do not try to read it. It's all online. It's all on GitHub. But basically, it's a series of open source communication tools. It's a data structure. It's a set of user interfaces. It's a visual language that's intended to take the work out of understanding these technologies away from the public and make it easier for them. And so, you know, in the final months of the Sidewalk Labs project, just as this idea was, you know, an idea on a page, we were starting to get interest from some cities in this idea. And so when the Sidewalk Toronto project ended, I actually ended up taking this open source project and spinning it out into the company that is Helpful Places and that we're running now. And that in turn led to the first DTPR experiment with the city of Boston with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. And so Nigel Jacob is here today to talk a bit about that experience and talk about sort of why Boston decided to get started with this project. And I think what's important to know is that in the 5 years since that initial experiment, this idea that everyone, everywhere should be able to discover the layers of technology that overlay our cities is actually getting a lot of traction. We've been deployed in more than 13 places around the world, and these are just the organizations we work with directly, where we increasingly hear about people that are just using the open source resources on their own, which is amazing. And so these are cities, these are innovation districts, and these are all organizations that are really thinking about how does technology become part of the delivery of places. And they're interested in being proactive with community members and helping them understand the why of what they are doing. And so what we're seeing across all of these projects is that not only use of the standard helps raise community awareness and help increase trust in emerging tech, but it actually starts to serve a really important organizational purpose, where now the technologists, the place managers, the comms, and the community engagement people inside an organization can all have clarity about what these technologies are actually doing and be able to then present a unified front to the public about what these things are actually doing. And so with that, I'm super excited to sort of set up the Leah Eriksen, the CIO from the city of Long Beach, where digital trust for places and routines has increasingly become a core part of how their approach to smart cities, being a sort of fundamental piece of their digital rights platform, and is one of the ways that they work with, is one of the tools that they use to support community collaboration around smart cities. And so with that, it's my spiel, and I will turn things back to Greg to make sure I stop talking, basically.
Thank you, Jackie. That was a great introduction in Hero's Journey. All right, so Nigel, it's May-ish 2020. We're a couple months a little crazy with the pandemic. Jackie comes to you from the Chernobyl of PR that is Sidewalk Toronto, and she says, "I've got this standard, and I want it in the world. I want to do with it." And you say yes. And my question for you is, why did you say yes? Were you already looking for something like it? And what problems did it solve for you and Monum at the time?
Does that work?
Yeah. So a quick word about neuromechanics. So neuromechanics was founded decades ago to be the experimental arm of local government. Essentially, it's a lab where we're allowed to take risks and just try things. And in around 2020, the years I don't know what year it is now, but I don't know what happened to. But we had an issue in Boston, right? So Boston, like most large American cities, larger, Boston isn't that big, has a lot of hardware on the poles, right? And oftentimes it just is background noise. People ignore it. But there was a moment, I think it was because people were, consumer electronics are getting more sophisticated, and people are getting generally more sophisticated as far as what technology can do. People were suddenly looking at the light poles and saying, that looks like a camera. And what is it doing? Is it recording me? And if so, what for? And what is that thing beside it? I swear, is that a sensor? And so we were getting lots of those questions. We were actually getting them in through our 311 system. We would get them, the mayor would get these questions at community meetings, so with city councilors and so on. So we had this need, and those questions were not pretty, right? Because there was a lot of assumption that it was surveillance and that we were surveilling people. And so we need to have a way to engage the public in a dialogue about it, but in a stepwise way, right? So we didn't just want to let's do a hearing on it, because that's usually the way that government would do it. We would do a hearing, and we would bring people in, and it would be ugly. So we decided that there's got to be a more continuous way to do this. And the idea was, what if we just labeled it? Right? When you gave you enough information, so when you point at it, you can actually tell something about it, or you could point a device at it, and it could tell you what it was doing. And so that was the idea. And we were kind of circulating with this idea, and we'd sort of been fiddling with this idea for a few years. And then one of our team, we had already been watching Sidewalk Labs in the implosion in Quayside in Toronto. I'm actually from there, and so it was like an interest of mine. And we were watching it, and we're saying some of that, a lot of it is weird, but a lot of it is cool too. And so we reached out, and we called Jackie, a member of my team did at the time, and we sort of kind of broached the topic that we need a way of stimulating discussion rather than us simply pushing a discussion at the public, but we want to sort of call attention to these things and then use that as the context for being in dialogue with the public.
All right,
that was the idea.
Quick follow-up to that one then. So if you're the first real-world implementation of this, what was the initial response from people who had never seen something like DTPR? Did it in fact instill trust by having this communication aspect, or did you have to hold hands? Did you have to explain as well, or what was the initial response and reaction? Yeah,
so I think originally we got some scratching heads originally, and we did have to do a little bit of explanation. So we did that, and so we had to sort of talk through the icons. Was there sort of non-traditional looking icons? They're cute.
I think Nayeli said that some people be like, "Are those skate stickers?"
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. And so, but it did create curiosity, and that was exactly what we wanted to have happen. That people would quizzically look at it and say, "What is that thing doing? And where does the data go? Can I access that data, or someone monetizing that data?" So it was for us it was mostly sensors on the side of buildings and on poles and cameras, because we have a lot, like every city, we have a lot of cameras.
Great. All right. So if Nigel and Monum adopted this, then really out of this pressing emergent issue then 5 years ago. So Leah, you've sort of coming up from the opposite angle, where you have put in place your own digital rights platform and had a cohesive strategy. And so number one, can you explain a bit about what the platform is, and then number two, how does DTPR fit into that, and how did you see it having a role in this larger umbrella?
Yeah, great question. So the city of Long Beach decided we wanted to do a smart city strategy, I think it was in 2019. And we wanted to make sure that we were engaging our community in the development of that strategy. So we did a lot of surveying and workshops and focus groups. And when we asked our residents questions like, do you even know what a smart city is? About 40% had never even heard the term before. But we also asked about, well, do you see, after defining it, do you see any benefits, convenience, things like that? And generally people agreed or somewhat agreed that they could see conveniences related to smart city technologies. We then asked them, well, do you have any concerns about privacy and how we use the data? And 80%, were somewhat or very concerned about the use of the technology. And so we've used that survey results to inform our smart city strategy. And one of our 4 guiding principles is earn public trust, which is to fostering public trust through excellence in data privacy, data transparency, and community engagement. And when we had our city council approve the smart city strategy, we had them also approve a data privacy guidelines along with that, because we knew that if we were going to truly be a smart city, we had to address and earning public trust as part of that. And so I think it was in the summer of 2022, we had 2 Coding It Forward Civic Innovation Fellows prototype using the DTPR, like 2 different pieces of tech, and developing it on our open source data portal, not our open source, but on our data portal that we had for open data. And then we partnered with Cal State University Long Beach to do some data walks where we had residents walk around and look at the signs and engage with with the tech to give us feedback. And based on that, we did realize that they were appreciative of the type of information that was there. They were also concerned about how, for example, one of the technologies we had, the retention period was indefinite. And so even just as a result of doing this pilot, this proof of concept, we needed that change. And we said, okay, you know what, you're right. We need to make that only relevant to how long it's needed for the convenience portion of that tech. And so fast forward another year, we got a National Science Foundation grant, also partnered again with Cal State Long Beach, and we expanded it to now we have over 25 techs demonstrated on our digital rights platform and counting, and we did another set of digital data privacy walks to get more feedback, and it's going to continue to grow, and one of the things that's really important about this digital rights platform is that it helps with the transparency, it helps with accountability. As I mentioned, we're already changing things like retention periods based on the feedback. It also has an opportunity for residents to give us feedback and tell us how comfortable they are with the tech. And it basically is a really important part of our strategy of earning public trust so that we can continue to realize the benefits of the smart city technology in a responsible way.
Great. All right. Well, the question I have then, Jack, I'm going to come back to you, is because you flashed a lot of organizations. You mentioned it spreading out into the world. So I imagine a question that a lot of people have when confronted with DTPR is, well, how do I know it's actually doing what it says it's doing? And as it spreads, because you mentioned, obviously you're representative of 2 cities, elected governments, accountability, but like Sydney Olympic Park, quasi-governmental, Michigan Central, quasi-governmental, and then anybody who's just using it open source. How do you build in accountability, or how have you seen people build in accountability versus surveillance washing effectively? How do you make sure they're not using DTPR to lie about what they're doing?
I wish I could read their minds. Yeah. I actually can't. But that's different tech altogether. That's different tech altogether. Different startup. But I think this is where it is. We start to fall under consumer disclosure protection laws, where you're asking technology vendors and technology companies to essentially describe what these things are actually doing. And so in a way, and I talked to some of my friends who are like privacy consultants about this, and they said, yeah, it's like we don't run an audit business, so we don't actually technically audit these things. But because we're essentially a legibility layer or a translation layer on compliance documents that are already being submitted, like a privacy impact assessment, Like that is actually the foundation. And because this is also like labeling or product description, consumer protection rules actually start to apply, and those can have teeth. We're also starting to see with Sydney Olympic Park in particular, they're starting to build this disclosure requirement into their RFP and procurement processes. So when vendors come and propose to them, they know they are expected to actually disclose in not just like, here's my 500-page privacy policy in terms of service, what is actually happening, but to make this really legible and understandable. And I think what's interesting is that we're also starting to see through in our engagements with place-based organizations, the vendors that they're working with saying, whoa, this is actually really useful to me as a startup to be able to describe and make it clear what our tech is and isn't doing. We have a French sensor company called UpCity. They build a computer vision technology, and they're like, we actually can't. We don't use a high-resolution camera sensor. It's incapable of collecting personal information. And they were interested in the standard as a way to be able to make that really clear. That it's, so there's an ecosystem, I think, of interest that's not just the place managers or the place-based organizations in having that clarity around the way the tech works.
Great. Nigel, I want to go back to you. I mean, five years in, what have you encountered in terms of challenges, or what have you seen in terms of the limitations of DTPR and being able to meaningfully explain these concepts to people? Because, nutrition label is a great phrase. Nutrition labels are very helpful, but people still make terrible choices eating, and it's because sometimes they can't read the nutrition labels or they just ignore them. Right. So I'm curious, where have you seen successes and limitations of this approach?
I think we likely didn't go far enough. I think in our field, for those of us who do tech in public spaces, we talk a lot about trust, but never really define it. Like, we never really, does 311 grow trust? Maybe. And so I think, we're very loosey-goosey as a field about that, and that hurts us. So then we're kind of caught guessing about the trust between the public and the public sector. And so that's an issue. So I can never really give you numbers. I can give you proxies. I often think that when we're talking about trust, we're actually usually talking about brand recognition, that the city of Boston or the city or the county of Long Beach are doing a good job. I think it's often like a relational feeling that we feel good about it. So I think that, as a result, we can't make very substantive claims that doing these things grows trust. I do think that in general, when we can be in dialogue with our public and talking about difficult things, I think, insofar as the social science, that does create a basis for trust, and that's why we do it, right? Because we're followers of Jane Jacobs, and so I think so. Whenever we can be in dialogue about these things, there's still a lot we don't know. We're getting pulled and pushed into the realm of AI. And obviously, it's a tech that is changing and is going to continue to change our public spaces and how we live together in communities. And there's a lot that we need to figure. And there's going to be hard discussions. And so I think we need to be a little bit more rigorous and can ask harder questions.
That's great. Well, yeah, I want to ask you a variation of that as well, too, which is the same sort of thing. It was like, how have you sort of seen this reception, and how are you trying to puch the taxonomy forward at all? I'll come back to, I know Jackie's trying to extend it, and I want to ask about that one, too. But, where have you seen the gaps? Where have you seen the limitations? What does it succeed in really explaining to people? I'm always curious, what people say. Do people say, oh, I feel better knowing that is not keeping the footage of tracking me? Do people actually think that, or how do they express their relief, I guess, when they understand what it's saying to them?
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that the second version of our digital rights platform is based on Healthful Places. It's hosted there. And by the way, they hired one of those Coding It Forward fellows that worked on the original prototype, so I think that's beautiful. So what we found when we did those data walks was that residents were appreciative that we had the digital rights platform, that they had the signs. And then we asked them, do you expect the city to be transparent? And they agreed, yes, we actually do expect our cities to be transparent about what technology they have in the right of the way. They did, there was some, you'll see ours had some physical signs as well as the digital rights platform. There was some concerns about signage fatigue. Also, are people really going to like scan QR codes? There's sometimes cybersecurity concerns about those. And like where do you put the signs and so there's those types of challenges, and that's why one of the things we're pursuing is another National Science Foundation grant with Cal State University Long Beach, with our hope of developing an app. We would still use the DTPR on the app, but the app would have a little bit more information, a little bit more interaction, and also why we call this a digital rights platform is eventually our hope is to allow residents to opt out where it's practical. Now, okay, as a city CIO, I can tell you that makes me scared, of trying to figure out how residents can opt out of the data that we're collecting for city municipal purposes. But in the state of California, there is a law that cities don't have to comply with, but that private corporations do. It's California Consumer Protection Act, which allows residents to basically say, please forget my data. And we work with a lot of third-party systems, and so we are going to be working with, if we get the funding, to develop those kind of opt-out type of things, so residents have sovereignty over their data where possible. But at the same time, our hope is by building this trust, we can convince our residents that no, we're actually this isn't identifiable information, or we're only keeping this for 1 month, and it's because we need, for monthly parkers to be able to go in and out of a garage, things like that. And then once we explain why, that they are not as concerned about why and how we're using the data, and then hopefully they'll, basically trust the city to continue to use data for the efficiency and other purposes why you want to be a smart city.
Great. All right, I've got one more big question for my panelists, and then we'll open it up for an audience question or two. So start thinking on this. But Leah, that great phrase there, the sense of like the signage issue. If we can't just put QR codes everywhere because as this technology scales, and that was one of the questions that Jackie talked about. I want to just plug my report again. So for Cornell Tech, I worked on this report about thinking about the implications of augmented reality if and when that finally happens, and then AI at scale. And Jackie, presenting my cohort, actually had this great thought exercise about thinking this through here of, for example, as the technology environment continues to evolve, Meta Ray-Bans are a camera with a large language model strapped on your face that can have machine vision attached to it. And there's experiments of AI agents using machine vision models. You can take that same camera and AI and you can put that in a camera on stationary. You could be watching from that. We could be interacting with AI all out in the street. And there's a great workshop that Jackie's hosting tomorrow. Same time, not the same bat channel, but here you can sign up for this one too to join to think through these implications. And that's the question I want to ask Jackie is like, how are you thinking about this for the age of AI here? We're now going to walk into an environment and there might be multiple querying agents that are trying to talk to me or find out what I'm wearing. They're trying to identify me. How do I know what they are, who they are? How do I query them? I don't know if I can do that with a QR code. I don't know, or if I can do that with a taxonomy. How do you scale DTPR into its own sort of programming language almost?
So you actually asked at least 3 questions.
Take the one you like.
But I think actually in the as we were running these co-design projects for digital trust for places and routines originally, we actually got a question from one of the participants, like, so what? Like in 5 years, ironically we are 5 years later, so like in 10 years, if this is adopted at scale, what does this actually mean? And how does that change my experience of the city? So we actually did a piece of speculative future-facing design where if something, a system like DTPR was actually implemented like holistically in a place, the idea that you could then actually offer an API to all of those systems, and that could enable that opt-out idea that Leah was talking about, that might talk to a digital agent, AKA your phone, and maybe according to your preferences, start to push out notices, push out notifications, ask permissions in a way that's much more interactive and not like a static sign. So I think I really see the sign as like the analog prototype version. And we're already seeing this in how different place-based organizations implement DTPR. Some really want it to look like a science fair. Some do not. Signage in the public space is actually fairly political and quite contested. And so what we're seeing with some of the living labs that we work with is they'll put up a single sign at the perimeter. Hey, this is a place that you can find out about all the technology that's in this place. Or maybe we only put up a sign when the technology is first being introduced, the same way we do zoning notices when we say, like, hey, there's a new development going here. So I think there's a lot of flexibility. And then in terms of the age of AI, what we're also seeing is the same way that there's public demand for understanding how data is being collected, we're also seeing increasing public pressure and legislative demand for transparency around algorithms. And so this is resulting in algorithm reporting laws. New York City has one. States like across the US are starting to implement them. And so the question we have for the standard is, how can we make the underlying compliance documentation also useful to the public? Our product lead likes to say we can do better than a pile of PDFs on a website, and I think we actually can. And so that's where we're going to be bringing the open source project next, is to AI assessments.
Great. All right, Nigel, you're out of modem now, but how are you thinking about this? Or how do you think the city should be thinking about this, of not just hardware devices collecting data, but
Right.
agents able to act on this kind of data that they are collecting and vice versa?
Yeah, I tend to look at these things through the lens of democracy, right? I think for a long time, people are used to having democratic deliberation over where a building goes, where a park goes, even where the bench goes. And some of that is zoning, but like we have that as practice. And I think what's happened is that we now live in a world where the machines and the devices are now up for democratic questioning, right? Who says, if a company says they're going to put a thing up that's gathering public data, like why should we say yes to that, right? Shouldn't I be compensated for that? In addition to opting out, can't they issue me some kind of microtransaction? Shouldn't like a quarter of a Bitcoin come to, or something? So I think that this is a different way of thinking about democratic process, because we're used to thinking about the democracy in terms of like governance and who's in charge and who gets to make the decisions. But when those decisions are being made by devices autonomously, they're agents, like our democracy needs to catch up. So we need to adapt it, or evolve it, or update it so that it can be inclusive of these digital decision makers.
All right, so building off that, Leah, how are you trying to future-proof this in, or how are you thinking about these issues and future-proofing the digital rights platform to be able to be adaptable for it? So,
Right. Well, as I mentioned, the app would probably be one way. One thing, though, I will say is there is some concern, already if you're in California, like those cookie things come up all the time, and there's going to be fatigue with all the pop-ups and other things as well. And one of the other things we learned was that people were actually, once they understood why we were using the tech, they were okay, with the trade-off. So for a lot of it, they were more concerned if it was something like personally identifiable than other things. And one of the other things is they kind of felt like their data was already everywhere anyway in the private sector. So they did see, though, a difference with cities, and I do believe cities have a higher duty of care to our residents because of the data that we collect and the way it can be used. But I know that didn't really answer your question, Greg.
well, it's just hard. It's just a question of like, how do you, this goes back to Jackie's work there, thinking about extending the standard as well. Like, with how do we create these as flexible, extensible systems that can evolve at the pace of the technology, to Nigel's point.
And I think part of the answer to that is to continue iterating it and continue using residents, and as part of the research and the feedback, and from that, then in like our partnership with Cal State Long Beach is another great one, because like they really did understand the data based on the feedback we got, and they helped us to inform the development of the tech. So that would be my answer.
All right, according to my watch, which is never quite right, I think it's fast, but I think about 5 minutes or so. What do you got, Jackie? Yeah, 5 minutes or so. Pressing audience questions. I will run to you and you will speak.
Hi there. Thank you for this discussion. Can you hear me? Jackie, I went on the walking tour with some of your colleagues last night. We did a walking tour of Hudson Yards, and as we were approaching the High Line behind the mall at Hudson Yards, there was a sign that literally said, occasionally, Friends of the High Line takes photos or video footage of activities on the park. By enjoying the park, you grant your permission to Friends of the High Line and its licensees to use such footage/photos for promotional and other purposes. I'd just love to hear, I'm not sure what I think about that, but I would love to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, I was curious about this too in terms of downstream uses, or can you build into DTPR about where this goes? Because not to get too political about it, but given some of the things that are happening at the federal level, where data gets routed from innocent uses into more pernicious ones is a very vital issue.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we do through the standard is to be able to communicate, like who has access to the data, like what's the retention policy, and so I think I actually commend the High Line that they're actually even disclosing that, because now you're like, oh, there is a potential for this happening, and at least, I guess if you were like really uncomfortable, you could email the High Line and say, I was here today, I don't like this, can you make sure you please don't use my photo? So I think what we've seen in some of we work with our organization sometimes, our partners, to run focus groups on exactly this question. And what is really clear is that residents already have an extractive mental model of this tech. They know that the data is being taken from them, but they don't know who is on the other end, and they don't know for what purpose. And I think what Leah was trying to say is like, and when you fill in the other side of the equation for them, it becomes at least like they can contest it, they can start to articulate sort of limits on how they want to see that technology being used. And that's a dialogue that we don't have right now. So I think it's like, I totally get, you felt uncomfortable, you're like, I don't, but the reality is there could have been pictures taken and it was never disclosed to you, right? So I think there's like that flip side.
All right, other questions over here.
Hi, Shilpa Galari from Deloitte. Thank you so much. This has been the best panel so far, I will say. My question is for all three of you, actually. I believe highly in city and regional experiments, and obviously today there is an opportunity to shape the national conversation around data privacy and what this means for citizens, residents, et cetera. How are you thinking about scaling your practices, engaging the national audience or even global audience on this topic?
Thank you. Nigel, you want to go first?
I actually didn't hear the tail end of that question.
Scale it to a national and global. So basically like go beyond cities to other levels of governance and geographies.
I think doing this, well, there's a couple things. So I think doing these things in localities, because it's physical, I think we can get into the nuance of it. So like this question about the High Line is really interesting because it highlights the fact that what does public mean? It clearly means several things, because the High Line is a public space created by private actors. And so the question, like, what kind of rights do I have in that space? So I think part of the issue, as we start to get smarter about how to navigate these ideas, we need I was going to say complicated, but we need more sophisticated ideas than just public or private. Before we came on here, we were talking about Quayside, the Sidewalk Labs project. And if you haven't heard of it, it's actually worth looking up, because they encountered a lot of thorny problems there. Because like the question is, you know, I was on one of the advisory boards, is a mall a public or a private space? It's kind of both. Right? It's kind of both and neither. And I think the distinctions are important, because you'll have different expectations over your rights and what happens to your data in those different spaces under different conditions. And so I think the potential here is to complexify, to trouble the ideas of like public and private, you know, and some of these higher level concepts. I think when we do it outside, you know, and you're looking at a building, you can ask more critical questions, and I think it's a way of making develop like a new language. I think that's what thing I love about DTPR. It is a different kind of language for understanding space, but we need to do more of that. because the world is going to get more complicated, not less.
Leah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and also just in the context of just Southern California, like how do you deal with this with your contemporaries and your peers in Los Angeles County and the city and other, the hundreds of municipalities?
Well, first off, the City of Long Beach is a proud member of the city's Coalition for Digital Rights, which New York and Barcelona were like two of the founding members of that. And we talk about our work, and share that with other cities. And that's why I'm here. Jackie asked me to speak. I was like, yes, because, I love the fact that this is open source, and that, cities, there's no such thing as plagiarism. They should have standards, and cities can work together to demonstrate how you can use this in a way that's not scary, that actually works for local government use as well, and is a model. I really believe that digital rights platform is a model that can be replicated across cities, across the world.
All right, Jackie, in 30 seconds or less, what are your plans for global domination with this?
Well, it's an open source project, so by its very nature, we can't actually dominate it, but I hope that what we can do is we can seed a community of practice and community of practitioners that believe in this idea and can actually help us build this dialogue together.
All right, on that note, can I get a round of applause for my panelists, for Jackie and Nigel and Leah?